All right, I think we're live now. Hello, everybody. Please say something in the chat if you can hear us fine. We're here to do, whoops. Yeah, we're here to do a monthly Patreon live stream. I've got one of my patrons, Galazar, here, and another one, Messi, might be coming shortly. We'll see. Hello, everybody. Excellent. And the sound quality is as it should be, unlike last time. So I'm happy about that. Things are working as they should be, technically. All right, we'll just wait for a couple of people to drop in, and then we're going to get started. How's everybody doing today?
Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to, I'm just collecting my thoughts, Caliban. But when I checked it, the sound was working for me, so I'm sure my sound's working too.
Yeah, I hear you fine. Yeah, so this is going to be a monthly thing. These live streams, they're gonna be unlisted, so they don't clutter up the feed. But whatchamacallit? Yeah, they'll still be accessible through the live streams playlist. So if you want to go back and watch a live stream, even though they're unlisted, you can still access them by going to my channel, going down to the playlists, looking at the live streams playlist, and finding whichever one you want. Hi, Pika Pro 16. I did not love the Hoven debates. I did not love being involved in those. Yeah.
Was that because it was just an unenjoyable experience, or do you mean that like in sort of like a looking back way?
No. Looking back, it was good for the channel, and I think a lot of people learned some stuff. It was just not fun talking to Kent Hovind, or I should say, talking at Kent Hovind the way one talks to a wall. Okay. I don't really have anything interesting to have everybody look at aside from these books and stuff. So I think I'll probably be turning off the camera. And next time I'll give everyone something a little more interesting to look at. Let's see. Yeah, I'm not surprised. Kent Hovind is a one-trick horse. Let's edit this guy. Shoot, how do I do this? By the way, we're gonna try to avoid ending. We're gonna try to avoid dropping any f-bombs on the live stream because we don't want to get demonetized.
Totally understand.
Yeah.
Best behavior only.
Yeah. Not funny anymore. Says would be awesome if to see you have a talk with James Lindsay. Well, that's on the Benjamin Boyce channel. You can go check that out. Lena says, hello, Your Majesty. Might you be working on Quantum Theory Made Easy 3? If not, Naturalist Nuke breakdown, please. Yeah, so Naturalist Nuke breakdown, more videos kind of along similar themes to that. That's coming. The next video is going to be a video response to Zoe B on the topic of facts and feelings, and basically the epistemic criteria that we can use to evaluate different representations of reality. I've been working on that for basically all year whenever I've had a chance. I cannot be producing content nearly as frequently as I used to because I'm absolutely slammed at work. But yeah. As for Quantum Theory Made Easy Part 3, I'll get to it eventually. But I'm prioritizing other things right now. And Quantum Theory Made Easy Part 1, I'm resolving a copyright issue with that one right now, so that won't be available for a few more days at least. Okay, I think we've got enough people in here to kind of start conversating, as the kids say. Um, so I'm still kind of in the experimental stage of these live streams. I haven't really decided kind of how these things are going to proceed. So, in future months moving forward, we're going to have kind of a topic of the month, and that'll kind of, and as more patrons come in, as more people join the Patreon. Link is in the description, by the way, and more people get to join these live streams. It'll be a kind of a more lively roundtable type of situation. But right now it's kind of early days, so we're just going to take it as it comes. I think we're going to let chat sort of lead the discussion.
Yeah, for sure. I'm just glad to be here. So
I'm glad to have you here, Galazar. You've been in my Discord for a while, so you get seniority privileges.
I appreciate that. It's been a wild ride since that initial opening up to the public.
Yeah, yeah. And then it got a little bit too open. We got flooded by a bunch of like anarchists and communists who were talking about Deleuze and Guattari and a whole host of shit, and basically giving us like a trillion notifications over the course of a single evening, and nobody got to sleep that night. And then I kind of had to, lock the doors and kick everyone out who wasn't supposed to be there. Yeah.
It was worth it though. I mean, some of the conversations we still like Opie and Messy and Sea Turtle and the boys still talk about it. There's
Mm-hmm.
been some several hour long. I don't even know what word to best describe it. Maybe you should call them lectures about alchemy, for example, amongst other topics. So.
Oh yeah. Are we talking about Felix?
Oh yeah, I just the name is sort of like Voldemort-esque to me. I'm not even sure where it's safe to bring it up.
Yeah, yeah. Nobody knows what the hell we're talking about, but there was this guy on my Discord who came in with like the flood of anarchists and communists. His name is Punished Felix, after Felix Guattari, and I guess the references to the fact that Guattari was a postmodern philosopher, and I think it was Guattari who ultimately like jumped off a building and killed himself. Either Guattari or Deleuze. The two of them collaborated so frequently that it's kind of hard to tell them apart. At least if you're not like a specialist in that world. Anyway, yeah, Felix was quite an interesting character. I'll leave it there. Chad, do you have like any Q&A related stuff you wanna would anybody be interested in maybe I don't know, talking a little bit about questions about what happens with the next video, things to maybe look forward to, what kind of topics are going to be under discussion. I want to open it up to the chat, since we're, like I said, these are early days for the Patreon live streams. Well, I guess while you're all thinking of stuff to ask or things to talk about, so I'll just give you a quick rundown of how the next video is going to go. It's about an hour 20, hour 30 minutes, somewhere between those two, and it's a response to a couple of Zoe B videos. Zoe B is a bread tuber. She made a couple of videos. One of them is called "Ben Shapiro is Wrong. Facts do care about your feelings." And the other one is "Why Facts Don't Change Minds, but Stories Do." And yeah, I'm going to be responding to these two videos. I'm not really interested in defending Ben Shapiro. There's a more fundamental conversation to be had about the standards that we use to evaluate different competing representations of the world. So that video is going to have several chapters to it. Yeah, I guess if people are interested in that, we can discuss that further. I see some other questions though. So Bubka's asking, when did you notice that many of the YouTube atheists, new atheists, have their own religiosity? I mean, I guess if you mean, they commit themselves to values that distort the representations of the world. There are things that they prioritize more than the set of epistemic standards that allow us to know as many true things as possible. I would say that for me, the cracks kind of started appearing in 2014, 2015. Um, there were good challenges coming out from some of the big online characters at the time. I remember interacting with Sargon of Akkad and thinking, he was pointing out some inconsistencies and some things that weren't quite adding up. Um, and I kind of became a Bernie bro in 2015, and it kind of created a crack in my trust of institutions and my view of kind of I don't know. It sent me down a path, seeing some of the things that went down, and kind of watching things snowball from there, and going down this rabbit hole of trying to explain my observations of the world. It became increasingly apparent to me that there are people who have certain visions of certain institutions, some of which they trust kind of uncritically, and some of which they distrust also uncritically. And it's all in service of an ideology that, well, I say an ideology. I should really say a constellation of ideologies that are kind of related to each other. Um, yeah, Babylon Project. I used to be a Bernie bro. I even shook his hand when he went to I went to UC Santa Barbara as an undergrad, and he held a rally at Santa Barbara City College, and I was like right in the front row. I shook the dude's hand. Galazar, you want to talk about that experience?
About meeting JP?
Yeah.
A friend of mine a couple months ago asked, he was going through like a breakup, so he asked me if we could go see Jordan Peterson in Toronto, just because he's a little bit more into Jordan Peterson than I am, and he thought it might be good for him. And we went, and I ended up getting a VIP ticket, strangely enough, and he didn't. And I don't consider myself like a Jordan Peterson supporter, but I do find him interesting. And it was really surreal because in person he's like really intimidating because the way he moves is very like fluid and ethereal, if you know what I mean. Like it's hard to describe, but like he's a little bit taller than I expected, and he's just very like. But maybe that's just what happens when you meet somebody that's like a celebrity, because I've been seeing him in the news so much. Um, but he still seems like he's in like, in my opinion, he's in like pretty rough shape still since the all the stuff that he's been going through. So he's not like 100% in it. And I was kind of disappointed because in the VIP chat, when we had the opportunity to like get really close to him, and just like the like 40 or so of us that were there got the chance to ask questions, a lot of the questions were just like somebody was like, "Hey man, what do you think about LSD?" So
Oh
I feel
yeah.
almost like it was a wasted experience in that sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. Well, I won't speak any more of that. It's a little close to home for me, but yeah. I've never really followed Jordan Peterson all that closely. I've mostly been interested in the effect that he has had on progressives, which is bizarre. I think I don't really know how to put it. I guess I don't really have a general view. I just have like specific things that really come to mind, like the postmodern neo-Marxism thing. How could you think, Jordan Peterson, that there's such a thing as a postmodern neo-Marxist? Don't you know that postmodernity is in direct contradiction to modernity, which produced Marxism? These things are incompatible. There's no such thing as a postmodern neo-Marxist. This is a buzzword. You're chasing ghosts.
He addressed that in the talk that I just saw, actually, that exact, almost like word for word the way you just said it.
Oh, what do you
And he
say?
and he well, he cared. I mean, you literally said it exactly how he said it, because he was making fun of the people who raised that criticism against him. His answer was, I mean, I think that the nature of the whole talk was that he spoke about the topics that he did kind of superficially, but his answer to that was, and he got up. He's like stood up and got very energetic. And like, if you've seen his videos, you'll know what I mean. Like, he got this very like angry face on, and he said like, "Don't you think I know that already?" He's like, "It's my whole point that their position is incoherent. It's not a problem for me that their position's incoherent." Was pretty much what he said about that. And then he sat back down and he closed his eyes for a while.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and you can, if you know how to use a bibliography, you can look into the influences of somebody like Bell Hooks or Patricia Hill Collins or uh, Kimberly Crenshaw, and it's Herbert Marcuse, it's Theodore Adorno, it's Max Horkheimer, but it's also Foucault and Baudrillard and Deleuze and Derrida. Like, the people who principally influence the thing that Jordan Peterson calls postmodern neo-Marxism, and what the rest of the world just calls intersectionality. Um, you know, it's a little nuts to me that people are making this kind of criticism and feeling like they're super smart. But yeah, I'm agreeing with what should we call it? Yeah, I'm agreeing with kind of the general ambience that I'm getting from the chat, which is that the reaction to Jordan Peterson is more interesting than the contents of Jordan Peterson's beliefs.
I do want to say what I wanted to ask him, I didn't get the chance, and maybe this will be a little bit more interesting. Is when I first got into Jordan Peterson, I had the same experience a lot of people had, which was that it was beneficial to me to have that sort of like the energy that he had at that point, because I was kind of stagnating, and he got me jump started again. I mean, other people were in worse states than I was that benefited from him. I was doing pretty all right, but it was still, I had that experience. And for a while, I really identified with him, and I started like to get into more and more social circles, especially in university, that were oriented towards Jordan Peterson. And I don't know how I got so far into it, but all of a sudden, it was almost like a light switch went off. The people that I was around that were about Jordan Peterson, it was as if I never noticed it before, but all of a sudden they all became very like theistic. Like I realized that I was like the only atheist in the whole room. Um, and some of them felt like really like compromised by me being an atheist. Like they almost felt like I was like an interloper in a sense. And what I wanted to ask Jordan Peterson about that was, and I'm really disappointed I didn't get the chance to, was that since like I think it's true that there's like a common thread to his work and like people like James Lindsay's and like obviously your work also, which is like this resistance to like whatever this new Marxism movement is that's going on in like the vaguest sense. And I wanted to ask him if he thinks that atheism is like if he would be glad to have atheists like me participating in that like common struggle, or if he views atheism as like a significantly different belief enough that it would be like atheism's dangerous enough on its own that he wouldn't want to make that alliance.
I think, from what I know of Peterson, I think he'd be glad for a coalition with the non-religious, but he would never stop, kind of talking to them the way he talks to Sam Harris, which is that you are practically speaking a Christian. And actually, he makes uh, a fairly an argument that could be tongue in cheek characterized as postmodern neo Marxism. That basically you're enculturated in the society. There are discourses and institutions that have been propagating over the years, and over hundreds and over thousands of years. And our society is the product of the interaction between there's these historical interactions between these discourses and these institutions and the cultural changes, and we're kind of riding the cultural tide of history, and that tide is at least in great part Christian in character, and therefore in defending the institutions and culture, at least to the more fundamental degree that we're doing, then by virtue of our participation in that common history, we're Christians.
Yeah, I mean, I really have always found that a really annoying conversation to hear. like that's not to say that I don't give the devil its due, so to speak, with like the merit of it. But that's one of the things that really got me when I started having this experience where a lot of like my Jordan Petersonite fans, because actually a lot of them I met them because they said the word Jordan Peterson in class at one point, and afterwards they were like, "Hey man, you're one of us." Um, but getting told that I should be more self-aware of the fact that I'm not really an atheist is kind of like a bizarre thing to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, culturally, the fine. If you want to call us cultural Christians, then whatever. But for me, religious belief is fundamentally an epistemic matter. It's your position in relation to your knowledge of a certain proposition, the God proposition. Uh, so I don't know.
Do you think it's a fair criticism? I feel like I'm not giving them enough credit here, but it seems to me that at the face value of that claim, that um, the fact that there were peaceful, moral civilizations adjacent and prior to the Christian religion, like should be enough to diffuse this necessary relationship they have with my moral action and being a Christian. But maybe I'm not thinking about that clearly.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. But I'm glad you got to have that experience. I don't know what kind of conversation I would have with Jordan Peterson if I met him in person. I don't expect it would be terribly interesting. He and I are concerned with very different things. He's I don't know. I've never really looked up to life coaches, and he kind of gives off a sort of life coach energy to me. Anyway, um, yeah. I'm gonna look through the chat and see what other whatever strands people are going into. Um, Killswell says that we had a brief conversation before. So yeah, sorry, man. I don't remember that conversation. Maybe you can stir my memory. Let's see. So Carl Winterling says intersectionality is not a centralized ideology with the Leninist party apparatus. Yeah, I agree. I would even go further. I would say intersectionality isn't an ideology, period. I think intersectionality is more of a strategy than anything else. But that's a whole other conversation. Yeah, the Babylon Project. I agree completely. The life coach energy is the reason I stopped reading his book. 80 pages. Yeah, same here. Uh, I know a lot of people who were like, people I like and people I respect. Uh, okay, Watcher 7180. No, I'm not a Christian. I'm not a Christian. What I said was that if they want to say that I'm a cultural Christian using that, riding the tide of history type of argument, then sure, I'm a cultural Christian in that I carry on the values and the history and the discourse, so to speak, of this kind of deeply Christian influenced history. But that I'm not a Christian in the sense of the word that like 99.9% of the people would recognize. All right. Yeah, so like I was saying, a lot of people I know and respect really got into Jordan Peterson, kind of treated him as a sort of, I don't know, um, father figure. And yeah, I never gravitated towards that. I hear some talk of reactionaries in the chat. I recently, did some deep reading into neo-reactionary critiques of democracy, and I found this very interesting, actually. Um, I'm not, before people start losing their shit. I'm not a neo-reactionary, but I think that the writings of Curtis Yarvin, more commonly known as Mencius Moldbug, I think they contain some pretty hard-hitting criticisms of the democratic process, and problems that are inherent to large-scale organization of the sort that characterizes what we might call the managerial elitism of our time. Let me think. Yeah, I will say though, when neo-reactionaries stray away from their conversation, from their critique of democracy, and instead like talk about cultural stuff, it gets super cringe. Like there's this guy Justin Murphy, and I saw a funny Twitter video of him where he basically got into a fight with somebody in like the NFT community, and he was like saying something along the lines of, I don't want to hear any disrespect coming out of your mouth when it gets attached to my name. I'm your intellectual superior, by like, and he's like filming it from the angle where like if you're sucking his dick and you're looking up, that's the angle that he's filming from. And he's a neo-reactionary. He's a big neo-reactionary online as well. And he's it just gets super cringe when they stray from conversations about democracy. But yeah, interesting stuff. Back when I called myself a progressive, the thing that mainly kind of attracted me to that was the idea of holding power accountable. And I had on board the sort of Cenk Uygur politics where everything was boiled down to money in politics. The reason why our democracy isn't working is because you have these rich lobbyists and all of these people who have wealth who are putting money into politics, and that's causing our representatives to channel their interests instead of ours. And I see the neo-reactionary critique as kind of being an extension of that, a generalization of that, in a way that the sort of progressive Cenk Uygur way of approaching the problem never really was able to go. But that's a whole other conversation. Have you ever had interactions, Galazar, with neo-reactionaries?
I've certainly never had interactions with anyone who thought of themselves that way. At least not any that were significant. What do you think? What do you think the core of what? Like, let's say there's people, and I mean this goes without saying, that they wouldn't call themselves a neo-reactionary. What do you think is like the core thing that you could use, like a litmus test, to identify what you would consider somebody that should be categorized that way?
I think that if you take the view that democracy is fundamentally unachievable because of the iron law of oligarchy, then and you don't like the fact that there are people in power who, let me put it this way: the people who are in power are not actually accountable to the public, and you want a state of affairs where the people who are in power, everybody can kind of see that they're the ones in power, but that's not possible in any kind of democratic system, even in principle, because of the problems inherent to large-scale organization. Then I would say that you're a neo-reactionary.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think honestly, where I'm from, in person, everyone here is so politically, they're so struck with political apathy that I don't think anyone operates at the level where they think about politics at that, like, enough to even have an opinion like that. But I will say that I've been in Toronto a lot lately, and I would say that pretty much sums up how every single person, without exception, that I've met in Toronto feels about politics. I think that everybody's expressed some form of, I guess, would you like the Cenk Uyghurism, almost like just the focus on that the political hierarchy is corrupted by money in politics and shadow governments and stuff like that, and not like the British shadow parliament. I mean, like
rich people who have a disproportionate share of democratic power.
Yeah.
And I used to hold this, and to some extent I still have this view, but I think neo-reactionaries make a good case for why, even if you got rid of that, you would still have a situation where um, the interests of certain people in certain groups um, would be allowed to exercise control over the polity. Um, that is to say, the polity, even though it thinks it's democratic, and even though they think they're going in to vote and they're changing things, that's they're actually just being led around by the nose by whoever's actually in power. And this is fundamentally different from the kind of critiques that you would have gotten from like early 20th century progressives like Walter Lippmann. Um, Lippmann, he was a guy who was really critical of democracy as it was constituted. He was really in favor of a kind of technocratic aristocracy because he thought that people were basically too dumb and too easily swayed to properly manage kind of the ship of. If you think of society as being like a ship, and you want the person to be steering the ship to be a competent captain. This isn't terribly different from the kind of argument that Plato made in the Republic, using Socrates as a human hand puppet. And I always really hated this kind of argument because I thought it was really condescending and super elitist. And even if there is some truth to it, I hate that there are people who don't. Let me put it this way: I hate that there's this kind of picture of people generally as being incapable of critically scrutinizing their values and their beliefs. But yeah. Anyway, that's a very different kind of critique of democracy. That one I never respected, and I never really had time for. But the neo-reactionary takes their critique of democracy and casts it in terms of human organization. So the problem isn't that people are stupid. The problem is that organizations inevitably get corrupted, and inevitably you have oligarchy emerge.
Right. Yeah, I have to say that the chat is it's challenging to pay attention to both.
It is, isn't it?
It is. I'm gonna have to turn away a little bit from that. I will say I don't want to risk getting too off topic. I find that recently the idea, and maybe I risk becoming some kind of neo-reactionary myself here, but I find the idea of criticizing democracy kind of tantalizing lately, just because I have this sort of emotional reaction to things that are untouchable in some sense. I think that democracy is certainly one of those things, depending on who you're talking to.
Yeah,
Um,
it is a sacred cow, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think like for me personally, a while ago when I was still, because I used to be like a hammer and sickle Soviet loving, communist. Not terribly recently, but it certainly happened. And one of the things that actually happened that made me change my mind about that was I saw a video by Peter Schiff, if people know who that is. And this is kind of tongue in cheek, so I don't want people to think that this is still my belief, but he basically said he was talking to people on the street and somebody was complaining about the corporate involvement in politics, and he said that the reason that the corporate involvement in politics is a problem is because the political system is organized such that they have so much power that there's an incentive to want to purchase that power. And he said that the cure isn't to like just to try and ban people not from spending money in politics, because he said they'd always find a workaround because they're very smart. He said the thing is to like have the government have less power in the first place, then there is nothing for the corporations to buy. And that my only point of bringing that up isn't to proselytize, because I don't think that that's necessarily exactly how I describe my belief system, only to say that got me thinking about it in sort of like a different way. And that was maybe the first time that I started thinking about politics in a way that was different from the socialism that I had been involved with up until then. And the other thing about democracy that I find really interesting is that I think like with the United States, and I'm Canadian, so I know less about this than I should, but it seems to me that the idea of having a constitution that enshrines certain rights separates those rights from democracy to some degree, to a significant degree, so that it isn't merely up to a majority vote to decide things. Because I think at heart, most people don't agree with democracy, which is why the sacred cow thing is so poignant to me. Because I think, if it's going to be a sacred cow, how can it be something that so many people disagree with? Because when you ask farcical questions, like, if 51% of a room votes to eat the other 49% of the room, it's obviously not okay. And so that kind of makes some sort of level of separation from democracy in my view. And since then, I spend a lot of time thinking about what kind of more things can we put in a constitution instead of up for a vote. Um, and that's kind of my main interest in criticizing democracy, which things are inappropriate to be decided that way. I'm sorry for briefly monopolizing the chat
No, no,
there.
no, 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 no. That's good. That's why I brought you on here. Who'd you say this guy was?
Well, the original person who said that was Peter Schiff. That's Schiff. He's I don't know terribly much about him other than that he's like a businessman, and I believe it would be fair to categorize him as like a libertarian activist. Probably he'd say it more like a free market activist. He's the one who originally said that the problem with money in politics wasn't that we should try to ban people from spending money in politics. He said that the problem was that the political system's organized so that it's weighted, so there's so much authority in the political system to buy in the first place. That everything after that was just kind of me rambling. I don't think it would be fair for me to blame Peter Schiff for my.
Yeah, no, no, no. You're good. You're good. Yeah, yeah, and I think the neo-reactionaries would probably take that critique, and generalize it to say that all large-scale types of human organizations, not just like nations and stuff, but corporations, for example, they have to be run oligarchically because otherwise they just don't work. But yeah, I don't like their proposed solutions to this problem. Some of them are about like absolute monarchy. We're gonna put absolute um, dictatorial authority in one person, and if something in society screws up, then we know who to point the finger at. They're not going to be able to hide behind the election cycles. Oh, it was the last guy. The last guy's fault. I wasn't able to get anything done for the last 4 years. Oh, it was the parliament's fault. They kept getting in my way. Oh, it was all the states, and they're not listening to my federal mandates. That's it. Like that wouldn't be possible anymore. Because the buck would stop with the person who has absolute authority. And I think this is kind of a BS solution because how are you going to hold accountable somebody who has absolute power? Like, yeah, you can point the finger, but as soon as you do, that finger is going to get cut off.
Right. Yeah, I know. I totally. Is that sorry, is it the case that the neo-reactionaries are asking for some centralized absolute authority?
Some of them do. Some of them are looking. Others, like Mencius Moldbug, are kind of envisioning creating like a zillion local quote unquote states, except they're more like corporations, and you can have like mergers and buyouts and stuff. And the way he describes it, I can't help but envision it collapsing into a kind of warlord situation where you ever play Agario? that
Yeah.
online
Yeah.
that online yeah, yeah, it's going to be like that. You're going to have all of these little circles that start out as little, but eventually some of them are going to get bigger. This is the problem with anarchism as well. It doesn't really matter that everybody starts out as a little circle. Sooner or later, coalitions are going to begin to form. People are going to stab each other in the back. Some people, some groups are going to maneuver better because of this or that advantage. Maybe such and such geographic location allows such and such to take place. And the end result is you end up with these really big circles that are eating everybody else.
I don't want to, like, this is just for the sake of interest. I don't want to give the impression I can defend this position, but I'm familiar with that. Some people would argue that because it is a really interesting question, and um, I think that there's an idea. I heard this first from Thomas Sowell, just so people know that I'm not completely making this up. But that even though large organized things like that can benefit from economies of scale and they can just keep exponentially growing, there's this sort of hypothesis that at some point that isn't particularly large, new local businesses will be able to outcompete. And I want to learn more about this so I can talk about it better because I find it really interesting. But basically, like when a corporation becomes sufficiently large, it starts to suffer from the inability to internally like like the price theory problem with socialism, right? Like that they can't price things properly, so they screw
Yeah,
themselves up. That
yeah,
corporations suffer from that really quickly once they start getting big, and that allows, and I mean it's more complicated than that, but that allows new businesses to outcompete with them at a local level, which would I guess the shortest version I would say that it would keep the market dynamic and not like in the agarrio like singularity, as long as there aren't government forces preventing that local competition. So I know that a lot of libertarians would argue that like that isn't happening now because there's like interference because of lobbyists, like regulations and licensing and stuff like that. But it's an interesting counter argument to that idea.
that's an interesting point of view. Yeah. Chad, what do we think about all this? Chat's doing its own thing. People are talking about torture for some reason. Maybe listening to us talk about politics is torture. Should we maybe change tack a little bit?
I'd like to ask you something more about your channel, if that's appropriate. I
Yeah,
want to make
yeah, sure, go for it.
um, I've been trying to think about how to say this concisely. I don't know if that I'm going to meet that objective, but I think with a lot of personalities, there's sort of like, let me talk about James Lindsay for a second. I think I view James Lindsay primarily as like the guy who's talking about Marxism. And I think that's fair because even he's complained that that's kind of who he become, and he wishes he had a little bit more dimensionality. I understand though that he's also, I think I'm right that he has a PhD in mathematics.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Obviously, you're an academic too, but
I was.
the stuff.
I,
Oh, you're.
I, I've gone on to the private sector.
Oh, congratulations! That
Thank
sounds.
you.
Yeah, but you're involved in science, if I may
Yeah,
be vague
yeah,
about it. And despite that, I mean, like, obviously that's a big part of your YouTube channel, but also a little bit of like the Marxism stuff bleeds through too, which is really good. I mean, that's great content also. And just finally, like someone like Jordan Peterson, he's got a little bit more variety. Like he's like some people say that he's a self-help guy, but he also really leans in hard on like the theology, and he talks a lot about just like psychology proper. My question is, with taking all that into consideration, if it were completely in your power, how would you like to be viewed in this sort of like oversimplified, labeled way? And secondly, that view, um, does it have room and the capacity to be organized in a way that sort of has a community based around it? And I don't want to say activism, but some sort of organization around it.
yeah, yeah. So I've had organizational ambitions for some time, but because I've been so busy, I haven't been able to put them into effect. Activism is kind of a full-time job, except it's not really a job. Unless you belong to an organization, but then it's not really a job. You just get paid to grift. But yeah, I want to create an online naturalist community, a kind of successor to the atheist and skeptic and all of the other. I want a community basically that's situated within this norm of developing representations of the world that are epistemically robust. Um, So I think I would be seen as kind of the founder, though not necessarily the central force, the central intellectual force behind that move. I want a critical plurality of competing naturalisms to coexist in kind of the same online space. and issue like a serious challenge to, well, all of the other groups that are in play. So BreadTube, NRX, um, white nationalists, if there are still any out there, um, or maybe absorb some people. I don't know. An online naturalist community that's basically dedicated to figuring out what's true, what isn't, and planting a kind of flag in the ground and saying, these are the criteria that we use to judge whether things are true or not. If your belief doesn't satisfy those criteria, then we as a society can't say that they're true. The best we can say is we don't know they're true.
Right. So, I mean, with like in regards to just to be like a little obtuse about the comparisons, like with James Lindsay, for example, we've got math and sorry, Marxism was like one of his, and I think that's a fair characterization. You think naturalism would be like the King Crocoduck buzzword for that kind of
Yeah, for
movement?
sure, for sure.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that naturalism can have so many like consequential beliefs too. With regards to the atheist community, I know people were asking earlier about somebody asked one of the very first questions about how the atheist community became like fractured because I was a big atheist YouTuber, like not a content producer, but just following everybody. Like you remember the Amazing Atheists all the way back when he first started and stuff like that. And the schism really like affected me. I like not like emotionally, I'm not traumatized, but I found it really striking. And I started to realize that the thing that had got me into atheism was the I have like a natural predisposition against anti-realism, if it's fair to call it that, and that a lot of the other atheists that I was associating with, and that like I would speak to even like in person, they had a completely different reason for being involved with atheism, which wasn't about anti-realism. It was sort of like I guess we could call it like a reactionary, like they had a problem with traditionalism and the Catholic hierarchies and all those kinds of
Right,
things. And I
right.
wonder, like, I feel that naturalism, in the way that we talk about it in the Discord and stuff like that, has implications that really, like, because like you talk about, I think, would you say it's fair to say that you talk about like the Marxism and the like the new peer review and like those kind of topics as a consequence of the naturalism
Oh
interest?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There's a reason why my channel seems to be so sprawling and unfocused. Why I have a bunch of videos on creationism, a bunch of videos on the new Lysenkoism, a bunch of videos on the philosophy of science. The broad underlying theme is the epistemic criteria attendant to naturalist philosophy. Um, but speaking about anti-realism for a second, I realize you probably meant that in kind of a specific way, of like not believing things that are real, or allowing admitting things into your epistemic framework that aren't, that are not ultimately accountable to our senses. Um, there's a different sense in which a lot of people use the word anti-realism, which is to basically say that the contents of our beliefs need not necessarily correspond in some ultimate sense to a real world. As a pragmatist, I kind of take the view that I don't care whether the world is real or not. And some people would say that makes me an anti-realist. I say that I'm a kind of non-combatant in that debate, but I just want to reassure anybody who does call themselves an anti-realist in that sense, that you would be welcome in the naturalist community, provided that you subscribe to the other priors of naturalism, which is
Right.
basic.
Yeah.
Yeah, we talk about naturalism, but I haven't really clarified what I mean by this. By naturalism, I mean a kind of metaphilosophical approach where we take the contents of our best empirical theories as sort of supplying the raw materials that we then philosophize about, as opposed to starting with a kind of as opposed to starting with a kind of philosophical preconception of what sort of things exist and what sort of things can be known, and working from there. Instead, you just start out by applying this naturalistic methodology. What am I doing in the world, and what is it about the things that I do in the world that can allow me to draw inferences about how the world is?
Yeah,
Um,
I guess I just want to say finally about that is um, what I find really interesting about all of the conversation about naturalism is that I've come to believe that naturalism, in the way that we practice it, has hard prescriptions for how we will inevitably, or how many people will inevitably feel about other adjacent beliefs. And oh, hey, Messi, I'm glad you're here. And I like for me personally, it was the central. I didn't think of it back then this way, but like the naturalism led to the atheism, led to my my the political journey taking the path that it did, and I'm also starting to believe that the people who are on a different path than I am politically and epistemically, I have a commonality that I haven't. I mean, I don't know how to exactly describe it other than that it's different than what I have. But again, like the atheists that split off, and the people who are Marxists, and all of that community starting to take like a single shape in the same sort of like way that it's spreading out, like a slime mold spreads out. These two like opposing factions. I'm starting to believe more and more that there's like almost that it's almost fair to say there's a dichotomy between those entire two spheres that is centrally rooted at what we have as naturalism as the central concern on one side, and I'm not really sure what'll end up being their unifying principle. Maybe their unifying principle is just going to be a lack of naturalism will be enough. um,
yeah,
I hope that
yeah,
that's cogent, at least
yeah,
5%.
yeah. I get you. I get you. Yeah, and it would be nice, picking up this online naturalist community strand. It would be nice to be able to eventually characterize the conflict in terms of naturalism versus anti-naturalism. Although I suspect we'll lose a lot of theist. I hate this word because it's been co-opted by woke people. Allies. We're going to lose a lot of theistic allies to naturalists unless they perform some radical transformations to their theism to make it compatible with naturalism. That's a whole other conversation. Maybe we could form a coalition between certain types of naturalists and certain types of people who get the right answers for the wrong reasons. But hello, Messi. Um, another patron of mine. How are you doing, Messi?
I'm well. I'm well. Sorry that I was late to the event.
No worries, no worries. Yeah, we were talking about a few things before you got in here. We were talking about well, as you heard, the online naturalist community idea, and for some time we were also talking about different types of critiques of democracy, especially neo-reactionary critiques of democracy. And now that you're here, we can kind of maybe move on to a new topic. Anybody who's interested in participating in these streams and kind of getting more of a roundtable thing going, and then, in the future we'll have like topics of the month, as I was saying at the beginning. The Patreon link is in the description, so if you want to be part of the next one next month, then go ahead and feel free to become a part of that. Anyway, Messi, what have you been up to lately?
Just currently writing a lot. I've been working on a thesis, so keeping you busy,
Nice, yeah, that they do. What is your thesis about?
So mine is on the education, informal learning of evolution, mostly
Interesting.
through museums, but also other methods as well. YouTube is hopefully going to be included on there.
Yeah, yeah, that's good stuff. Oh, our father in the green just commented, "I'd like to see more interactions with President Sunday." Yeah, for sure, for sure. For those who don't know, President Sunday is kind of like this left-wing YouTube channel who I interact with. I wouldn't say frequently, but not infrequently. We'll say somewhere between not infrequently and frequently. um, yeah, and before I know the right and the center tend not to do this as much, but they're not gonna. In case anyone's tempted to like do any kind of guilt by association, Casey, you're becoming a socialist. Stop talking to left. Shut up. I don't have time for you. Berg is saying, so the goal is to build a new movement of people with good epistemology, but you want to make allies with people who reach true conclusions with bad methods. That seems like a doom strategy. Yeah, I think you could be right, Berg, but I think it could also be argued that if you don't have friends politically who you disagree with epistemically and metaphysically, then I think that's doomed to failure. I think, practically speaking, some consideration should be given to differences in power between different types of political groups. It's like the Agario thing. You got a big circle and you've got a bunch of little circles, and there's this thing you can do in Agario where you can kind of like work together to shoot these saw blades at bigger guys, and that'll cause the bigger guys to split up and become smaller, and now you have an opportunity to become bigger. I forgot where I was going with this. It was a great game, Agario. I haven't played in a really long time.
Yeah, I think if I can chime in on that too, I think that I would propose that the most important thing with who we just like associate with is that anyone who's going to be an ally. I say that in finger quotes because I don't even like calling it that, but really the only important criteria is whether or not they're legitimately looking for the truth. And I don't even think it necessary that we have like a hard definition on what the truth even means. I think as long as we're dealing with people who are legitimately asking questions and not merely seeking to establish or to achieve some end, I think that that's enough common ground to work with anybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Messy, what are your thoughts on that? About making friends who we don't necessarily agree with, but who might help us drive forward our political ideals?
Well, I think that's necessary. You're going to have to befriend people you don't fully agree with if you're going to make a coalition. And I personally think it's just a healthy way of having a political sphere, because if you can't disagree with people, you end up with a lot of other issues. And I think it would lead to some epistemic issues, actually. But yeah, I do wonder how different this is from other communities that already exist, and what if it's just the philosophy of naturalism itself, or if there's something else. Because I'm thinking of like communities that are truth seeking, and I kind of say that in air quotes, but not exact. But I'm trying to understand how exactly this is differentiated.
What's differentiated?
The community that you're trying to create. I agree, because I am a naturalist as well, but I'm trying to understand how it will fit into the current spaces, like political space and whatnot.
Yeah, so the reason why, or one of the reasons why I call it the naturalist nuke, is because I anticipate it to be weaponized politically, even though that's not, its fundamental purpose. Its fundamental purpose is to help us, distinguish between good representations of the world versus crap representations of the world. There are political implications of that, and I think that the online naturalist community should take the naturalist nuke, or subsequent revisions of it. I produce what we might call the alpha generation of nuke. I can definitely foresee, a beta generation, a gamma generation, delta generation. Oh my god, the memes when we get the sigma naturalist nuke. But yeah, politically, the goal is going to basically be to say these kinds of things are justified beliefs. Those kinds of things are not justified beliefs. If the criteria aren't satisfied, then it shouldn't be entertained for the purpose of policy. And I've been looking into things like the reliability of social science, for example. And man, I've got some hot takes that I'm not going to share on this stream, but suffice it to say, okay, let me put it this way. There's a replication crisis in medicine. Something like half of all medical research fails to be replicated. which is kind of appalling, right? You know, like how can we trust medicine if half of the published research can't be replicated? And the situation in the social sciences is also quite dire, much more so than that. But it's a problem. So the question is, why is it that we trust doctors and we trust clinicians and medical practitioners when we go into the clinic or the hospital or whatever, but we don't necessarily, a lot of us don't trust social scientists' recommendations for policy, even though the replication rates are very similar. And the answer, I think, has to do with a kind of filtration system that's in place. There are institutions like the FDA and the ABR, that's the American Board of Radiology, that basically create a filtration mechanism so that whatever gets through, in whatever makes it into the doctor's office, whatever makes it into the clinic, that's only the stuff that has been reliably replicated. That's only the stuff that's based on a body of knowledge that can be shown to be robust and epistemically solid. Whereas nothing like that exists for the social sciences. We don't have. I mean, okay, you have trade organizations like the American Psychological Association, but you don't have, for sociology specifically, for example, or for geez, I'm blinking on. Let's just stick with sociology. There's nothing like that for sociology. So when a sociologist goes in front of the Supreme Court and argues that such and such interpretation of the Constitution should be taken, because if you take this other interpretation that according to our body of sociological research, you produce these unjust outcomes, and that's contradicting such and such, the 14th Amendment or whatever. And then you have this kind of the judiciary, the unappointed robed judiciary, start taking on the role of the legislature without being accountable to the people in the way that the legislature, at least ostensibly, are. It's a problem, and it's a problem that could be resolved basically overnight if you had an institution in place, a filtration mechanism for sociology, the way that we do for medicine and for pharmaceuticals and things of that nature.
I don't want to give you the impression that I disagree with any of that, but I'm interested because it's a really different angle than how I personally view the distinction. Because
Go for it.
I'm thinking a lot about how, and my intention is to be a specialist on the topic of the social sciences. Certainly, I'm not there yet, but my thought is that there's a fundamental epistemic difference that's a little bit more like it's completely separate from the sort of filtration, and maybe is it fair to say like quality control protocol that you're talking about? Because if you think about, like, just because we're going with the established comparison here, like with medicine, even if there's let's say like a really big problem with reproducibility, if you're a doctor explaining to somebody that there's this one study that exists that hasn't been reproduced, but everyone who took this medication for this problem had resolved, or there was like a significant amount of recovery. There's an understanding, I think, implicitly that there's a relationship between what was done that relates to the person. So what I mean by that is that if you are hearing that information, what you're understanding is that, I don't know, it's implicit to the research that was done. Presumably, this is true of all medical research if it's being done correctly, that the fact that the people who were suffering from the illness, took the medicine, recovered, implies something different than anything that's done in social research. It's a little hard to have this conversation without a specific social research question in mind. But if you're in the same situation and you go to, like, let's say now it's policy, and somebody's telling you, like, we're going to institute this policy, just like the way that the doctor talks to the patient because of these reasons, I think that there's like a completely different epistemic nature where, and maybe this is just a problem at the level of like the layperson, but when somebody says the same thing to you, we did this one study and we found this, I think the epistemic information that's being conveyed is totally different. It doesn't mean the same thing.
I take a different view. I think that the doctor would be very irresponsible to say on the basis of such, this one study, I endorse that. Because it might not necessarily be the case that whatever's true of that study is generalizable to the situation that the patient is in. Like it might be the case that, speaking in more concrete terms, let's say there's this new type of radiation therapy. This was the subject of my own research, without giving too much away. There's a new type of radiation therapy that we want to apply, but we don't really understand how it works. But according to one study, for the purposes of palliative care, which is there was a patient who was like on his way to death. He was going to be dead in a month anyway because of a whole bunch of other underlying issues. But there's this cancer that's also making him uncomfortable. So we applied this new type of radiation therapy, and he reported good results for his last month of life. Okay, if you take that and generalize it in a manner that doesn't necessarily apply, and you say to this person who's suffering from cancer, hey, this study reported a successful result with this new type of radiation therapy. You should give it a shot. Well, is it the same kind of situation? Is this person just trying to become more comfortable for their last month of life, or are they looking for something more curative? Rather than palliative. And I think that this is kind of a simple example, but there are a zillion of these kinds of variables, and they have to kind of be accounted for piecemeal by a whole host of studies, I think, before in the medical sphere, before this kind of recommendation can reasonably and responsibly be issued.
I do want to say that I fully understand what you mean, and I totally agree. And the difference between the two that I'm trying to evoke somewhat coarsely is not generalization. So I would be misleading you if I meant that it was the generalization from the experiment to the patient that was the problem. Because if we talked about it for long enough, we could really equalize the social science experiment and its application, and the medical scientist, like in terms of how do we control for the confounding variables, and the question of ultimately, like, does this person because every person's in a unique experience, does the experiment really and I think that's what we're kind of talking about so far. But what I really mean to say is that the social sciences have an extra dimension that's not present in the medical science. So we assume, as a matter of like a value statement, that the patient, and you offered two different options there. Are they trying to get like palliative care, or are they trying to actually recover? Or, but we assume from like a small subset of predetermined values about what the patient is looking to do. And a lot of the time, it will even make it so simple that we just assume it's one value in particular. The patient wants to recover. The patient wants to be free of the symptoms that they're experiencing. I think that the problem that I'm invoking is that with social sciences, there's this sort of extra dimensions of values that changes it. So like a social science prescription can't be made in the same way that a medical prescription can be made. Because like if you take priming, for example, in the social sciences, because there's a lot of social science work that covers how different things in your environment and your immediate sensory experience are going to impact, without you even realizing it, like the decisions that you're making. Like marketing, it's a big one in marketing, obviously, and there's a lot of crossover between psychology and sociology in this way. But the research that's done, even if you can somehow, I mean, this is probably impossible, if you like make it one-to-one methodologically in quality with the medical research, I don't think that I think there's some sort of barrier between the application process that's not there for the medicine, because the medicine is presuming the value that the person's wanting already. But when I come to you with a scientific prescription about priming, like, for example, if this is going on, people are going to vote this way, those kinds of things. I think I think that's the area where there's like this difference. Does that make sense, the way that
I think I get what you're saying. And I think I would kind of double down and say that even if we lived in a world where we all had identical values and we all knew what the country that we want to live in looked like, I think even under that circumstance, you could have a zillion competing social science hypotheses put forward, and well, half a zillion of them would fail to replicate, and the other half, to what extent they can be generalized to to meet the promises that some proposed policy carries out. I think fundamentally the problem is still there. I think it's a problem of generalizability, rather than necessarily of values. Like, yeah, there's the issue that the values of the social scientists might differ from everybody else's values, and the type of research that they produce, it might be geared toward a certain policy outcome. Whereas a social scientist with a competing political perspective, they might be doing science in a manner that supports a policy recommendation that competes with that. But at the end of the day, when you subject the two of them to these quality control mechanisms that are typical of the other sciences, I don't think either of them will necessarily be able to survive. Sometimes I get very pessimistic, and I wonder whether, sociology specifically, I wonder whether there can be even a science of society.
Only because I'm interested in attempting this, because I want to see if I can like reduce this to the fewest words possible. Because I am following along, I think. I guess what I'm trying to say is, and maybe I didn't realize that we agree, but like that the difference that I'm saying is in the medical context, the results are naturalistic in the sense that it's just, and I'm speaking like maybe too simple here, but it's just either true or false that the medicine treats the illness the way that we do that, and then the value comes in after that as to be, does the patient think that that's what they should do based on the information that they have. But with the social sciences, there is no objective truth to what they're saying. Like the objectivity and the values come in together rather than in a sequence.
Well, I'm not sure I agree with that. Like let's say we just pose the question, how do we decrease inflation, right? How do we make the value of the dollar? How do we improve that? Or I should say, how do we make it bigger or smaller, right? How do you make the number bigger or smaller? One social scientist comes out and says you should apply stimulus spending. Another one comes along and says, no, you should save money, and you should cut programs, and yada yada yada. Another one comes along, and you have the zillion people coming out with zillion policy recommendations, and you could have like a zillion hypothetical worlds where each and every single one is tried out, and in some worlds, the same. Let's say policy A is tried in 3 different worlds that have slightly different circumstances. There are a zillion variables that play in each world, such that even when you apply the same policy, they're going to be different outcomes. And it might be the case that you apply all of these different policy proposals to a zillion identical worlds, and none of them produce the outcome that's promised. And I think that's kind of the hopeless epistemic situation that something like sociology finds itself in, if I'm making sense.
Yeah, I think I agree.
Cool. Mesa, you've been very quiet this whole time.
I've just been listening in. But I would have to agree with you, Casey, because I'm just trying to decipher this whole thing in my mind right now. But I do think it kind of depends on what parts of the social sciences we're talking about, and
yeah, for sure.
Especially because if we're talking about critical theories and those types of things, which inherently take a prescriptive,
they're anti-scientific.
Yeah, they're
explicitly. They even acknowledge that they're an anti-scientific approach.
Yeah, but I think that I though I completely agree with you guys, I think that Galazar is mixing the two up a little bit, in a sense that
no. I don't think Galazar's at fault. I think
I don't think he's at fault. Sorry, I don't mean that, but I just mean that the descriptive versus the prescriptive models of, or I guess prescriptive is not the model of science, but what is happening in social science in a lot of these cases is also an issue that I think Galazar is hinting at as well. But maybe I'm wrong.
Well, I would agree with you. Like that's another layer on top. But I'm saying that even in a world where we all decided, you know what, let's not have any values other than epistemic ones, and let's just make predictions about how the variables of society are going to change when we apply, certain policies in place. I think that there's going to be a failure.
Hey, Messi, did we lose him?
I believe we lost him. Yes.
Oh, well. A perfect time for a communist takeover. Hey, Casey, I don't know if you can hear me, but I think I think we might have lost you. It says you're muted.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, you're back.
Yeah, you're back.
What was the last thing you heard?
It wasn't too long ago. You were discussing the layers in which I'm assuming you were going to talk about underdetermination in the social sciences. That's what it seemed like you were talking about. But I'm not.
I wasn't quite going there, but that's definitely related. Yeah, what I was saying, but apparently to myself, since nobody seemed to hear me, was that even if we lived in a world where everybody kind of agreed to abandon all values that are not epistemic in character, you would still, I think, end up with a situation where the social sciences would consistently fail, or specifically, I'm thinking of like macro scale social sciences like sociology. They would consistently fail to accurately and precisely predict how variables of society are going to change in response to certain types of policies being implemented.
What do you attribute that failure to?
I
Oh, that's a terrible time to disappear, but at least we'll remember where he dropped off again.
Yes, at least this time we'll know.
Bro, why do I keep disappearing?
But this time you dropped off right when you started answering the question, so at least we know where we lost you.
Yeah, this mic, I gotta get a new one. Let's see. Could you repeat the question?
That's what gallons are here for. So
yeah,
yeah.
I
was
there you
just
go.
Asking to what do
yeah.
you?
What do I attribute that to? I think one of the big things is the fact that large-scale social phenomena are so polycausal. There are so many zillions of variables at play that when you're trying to attribute causal explanations of the sort that would allow you to predict the dynamics of society, we are looking at a zillion contributors that each have a very small effect on the total outcome that you're interested in. And you basically have to do a zillion studies to look at every possible combination. I mean, yeah, I know there are inferential statistics techniques that'll, you can do your eta squared analyses for things that are like normally distributed, which they seldom are, and things with equal variances, which rarely happens. And so you got to do non-parametric analyses, and that drives down your statistical power. But it's layers and layers of problems. Like it just seems that there are epistemic limitations to what something like science is capable of. And I think that one of the consequences of widespread application of the naturalist nuke is going to be to say a lot of quote unquote social science, a huge chunk of it should just be ignored because it's cargo cult science, it's mythology posturing as genuine scientific activity.
How well, I got two questions about that, I guess. But the first is like how doomer should we be? It sounds like a fairly pessimistic view of the social sciences and at which point we should start listening to it. But
how doomer should we be? Look up on Google Images withered Wojak, and that's how doomered I am about the social science.
Can I jump in there really quickly because I just don't want to forget. I don't want to hijack it. This is relevant to that question. In the social sciences, and yeah, so let me just say it this way: in the social sciences, there are, in my opinion, sociological studies that produce two things. One, they're very reproducible, and they have been reproduced a lot. And those same studies, a couple in particular, not only are they reproducible, but they get the effect they're looking for to like a high degree. So it might be something like 80% of the participants, they expect that 80% of the participants will do it, and that's usually what it ends up being. In those, and they're rare. I'm not going to suggest that that's common. Well, maybe not rare. Let's say uncommon. But if it's the case that those, let's just say, handful of particular studies are capable of producing those kinds of observations consistently, and I'm only limiting this question to those studies, doesn't that suggest that at least some of the social sciences fully cross the threshold?
Yeah, yeah. So there are going to be survivors, but what I'm saying is you're going to have this tragic situation where a lot of it is going to have to end up being cut. And what I find, just from my own money, is the highest power statistical. If you have something in social sciences that's high powered in that you have a substantial effect size, and it's reliable in that you can consistently reproduce it, then when those two criteria are met, it's not going to be generalizable. It's only going to apply to a very narrow cross section of society and under very specific circumstances. So theories that are generalizable and that are reliable and that they're reproducible and that have high statistical power and that there's a substantial effect size. We're not just repeating obvious things that everybody already knew. Studies of that sort, maybe they exist, but they're like 1 in a zillion.
Messi, I know you had another question you wanted to ask before I cut you off.
It wasn't so much another, I guess, more of a comment that's kind of going off of this, but it just reminds me of a conversation I was listening to recently with I'm trying to remember the podcast it was on, but it was with a philosopher of science named Philip Lemoyne. And he has a very similar attitude on this topic. So it was just a comment.
Philip Lemoyne.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll have to look him up as well. Then
I can send you the podcast, but I'll have to look up the podcast. It's not. I don't. It was about not epistemology, but epidemiology, and the like the situation with that. So that was what he was responding to. But it's very similar, adjacent topic to what we're talking about.
I think we're kind of approaching sort of towards the end of the stream. Are there? Let's open it up to the chat. Do we want to do like a Q&A session?
I just hope they're not too distracted talking about their debauchery still.
Yeah. Why does this always happen in my streams and in the chat? Everybody just goes to war over socialism versus like democracy and everything.
There was a socialist in the chat, and it just devolved very quickly.
Yeah, I saw multiple. Yeah, I have a politically diverse audience, which is nice. Diversity is our strength, as the daily prayer goes. But let's see. Okay, our father in the green is asking, is it fair to say China and other revolutionary states had a communist regime seeking the ideal? I don't think that question is directed to me, and even if it were, I don't have an answer.
In terms of, I think it's a really interesting question that we keep seeing people talk about, like even now. I was kind of insular, and maybe you guys can tell me if you feel the same way. Probably not, but like growing up, like even right up until I was like in my mid-20s, it was just always a joke where it's like people would jokingly say communism had never been tried, because it was like just everybody like around me, and I didn't think I was living in an echo chamber, but like everybody knew that was the joke. But lately I've been hearing like more and more people say that unironically, and then they go like and they explain why they think there is no like communism hasn't been tried, and the Soviet Union wasn't communist, and China's not communist, and stuff like that. And
see, Galazar, my new reply for that is true capitalism hasn't been tried. That's what I've been trying to say.
Yeah.
That's a
Why
good
do we
one.
never hear anybody say true Nazism has never been tried?
I don't know if my social reputation can survive that one.
No, I mean, like, why don't we hear people who are what should we call it, sympathetic to far right views? Why don't we ever hear them say something to the effect of true fascism has never been tried? That's the only reason it hasn't been successful. Like, how is it that communists are able to say this, but fascists are not?
Yeah, my particular criticism of choice is to point out that, like, if you have a state that's killing millions of its own citizens, I don't understand why, like, an obscure point that they have dissimilar from Marxism is like enough to still, um I don't know, justify, like, how that could ever be more important than what they're doing in the name of, like, the 99% fulfillment of the idea.
Yeah, I mean, like, let's say, a lot of people hate Mark Zuckerberg, and for good reason, because of the kind of unfair power that he exercises over our social lives. Um, you know, let's imagine we lived in a world where the means of production were collectivized, and what we call it, Facebook becomes public property, right? We all have a share in Facebook, and Mark Zuckerberg ceases to be CEO of Facebook, and he becomes the minister of the Department of Friends. Does anything fundamentally change about that power relations? About his ability to exercise managerial control over the types of content that we're able to see and the types of interactions that we're able to have? Does that actually go away once you've collectivized Facebook? It just seems to me like communism is so focused on 19th century Germany problems and 19th century England problems that it's kind of forgotten its time and place in history, and communists today have kind of forgotten that they live in 2022 in a post-industrial society. Like, I don't understand what communism in a post-industrial society even is.
I think it's universal basic income now.
I wouldn't agree with that, but
No, I mean, I'm joking, but I just think that that's, from all of the communists that I know, and, like, the extreme socialists, I guess, for the people who avoid the communism word, that's the big one that they're all very much motivated by, in my anecdotal experience only, of course. Ninth Ring asks if you whether or not it makes a difference if, as shareholders, you can impeach the Minister of Friends.
Interesting. Let me think about that. Can we impeach the Minister of Friends? Well, let's say we could, and we replace him with another Minister of Friends, and that Minister of Friends, it becomes a situation, meet the new boss, same as the old boss. Like, does that differ substantially from what goes on right now in electoral politics?
feasibly, I don't see, like, if you wanted to have a vote on Facebook, you could do that right now. You could just go buy a share and you would gain a vote as well. So I'm trying to imagine how this actually works out in this Minister of Friends situation. Because anyone who wanted to vote at Facebook, if you had the requisites, you need the money to buy a share. But if you wanted to, you could buy a share and gain power.
Yeah. For me, the problem is the fact that somebody like Mark Zuckerberg has this kind of managerial control, and I'm being overly specific when talking about Mark Zuckerberg, but creatures like Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos and the grip that they have over commerce and the flow of information. There's something fundamentally wrong, I think, with the type of power relation that's being exuded by them. And I don't think it necessarily has to do with the fact that they're part of the owner class. I think it has to do with just the nature of large scale organization of social organization. and I don't pretend to understand the dynamics of this. I don't like I said with my complaints about sociology, I don't think anyone even can understand these dynamics. I'm just speaking, purely in terms of values here. I'm not a fan of the fact that I don't really have control over my own life.
I think I believe that it's possible to conceive of a political organization that I don't mean like an institution. I mean like a political way of organizing society that minimizes the extent to which those confounding elements of like the social dynamics that we talked about before have to play a role. And
Yeah,
I don't want to.
yeah. That's
Yeah.
kind of where I'm at. I'm my view of democracy and all these various institutions and stuff. It's the Churchill attitude. It's the worst system in the world, except for all of the other ones that have been tried. So, yeah, maybe all political discussions are just a LARP. Maybe all revolutionaries are LARPers. I said that tongue in cheek, so people shouldn't, get mad. I feel like we're reaching the end. Does anyone have any final statement they want to make?
Well, Javier Sainz says that true Lutherans are fake Christians. I think that's a. I think
It
that's
sounds
a
like a
good
meme.
final point. Really brings it all together.
Yeah. What about you, Messi?
I don't really have much to say about that, to be perfectly honest. I
Okay.
love this religious back and forth in the comments. It's great.
Yeah, the comments are such a mess, and I love it. They're not even paying attention to the stream. They're just duking it out in there. Yeah. So next month when we do this again, we're gonna have a topic in place, and hopefully we'll have more patrons join, so we can have more people in on the discussion. Yeah. Thank you for watching, everybody. Thank you, Galazar and Messi, for joining me. And keep an eye out for that video response to Zoe B coming soon. It's going to be called On Facts and Feelings, and it's going to be between 80 and 90 minutes long.
I'm stoked.
Yeah, it's probably going to be my best edited video ever. So I'm really looking forward to watching this all pay off.
Are you going to be premiering it?
Yeah, I'll be premiering it.
Excellent.
All right. Well, take care, everybody. Have a good one.
Yeah, thanks again.
Thank you very much.